You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way.
Hello, 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 hello.
Hi, and happy the end of Prohibition Day.
Happy June, happy everything. And I was wondering why I'm in the dark, and I realized because we started later. That's why I'm in the dark. I flashed my lights. Yes.
Of course, because I mean, it's amazing the difference that 5 minutes makes.
5 minutes makes at the moment, like we're going into winter soon. Well, we should be. Yeah. And it's suddenly getting much darker. So how is everyone out there in lovely out there land, virtual land? How's everyone doing?
Hopefully good. Please tell us how you are in the comments and stuff. Don't forget to weigh in.
So basically on Friday, if you were watching, and if you weren't, then here's a little catch up quickly. Our topic was embracing yourselves through the window of creativity. And this obviously understanding, of course, that creativity is at the very core of us as human beings. We are creative beings by our very nature. But because Carms and I are obviously performers, we decided to embrace it and kind of like explore it through the method that we know and that we employ with our job, which is performing. And so we looked at all the ways of doing this through method acting. And then we looked at mindful ways of kind of interacting with each other from more of a heart space. So how was your weekend, Carmi?
My weekend was good. I started watching that new series about Filthy Rich, about what's his name? I can't remember this guy's name. Epstein.
Yeah, thought so.
So I started watching that, which explores a dark side of humanity, and it was trying to I kept trying to. I think there's such a fine line between, it's not that you're excusing it, you're trying to empathize with where this person has come from and why he makes these decisions. But I think that he is an absolute psychopath. We talked about it last week. I think he was born without the ability to empathize, and he is so manipulative.
Sure.
So that just got me thinking about everything that we were talking about last week, and what it must be like to be like him, how he thinks and how he ticks.
And I think like exactly what you're saying is basically when you're actually dealing with people like that, then the amount of harm that they cause on other people. I mean, in essence, that's what we're supposed to be doing, is like causing no harm. When we're here for this human experience. And so, like you say, as much as we can do this work on ourselves, you can do it if you are able-minded, and if you're not, you need help. Seriously.
Yeah. And you know what, he was allowed to get away with so much. Like we were chatting last week, like how do you prevent if someone is going down a bad road, and let's say they are unable to feel empathy or something like that, there's something wrong with him. He was able to get away with so much from the very beginning of his life. And if he wasn't allowed to do that, would he be where he was today, taking advantage of all these people? So I don't know. It's very hard. It's very, very interesting. So that and my weekend, I didn't do an artist date because I was a human being and I was lazy, and I bought a budgie called Bolly. So that took up my time.
You came up with a name, that's fair.
Bolly, yeah. So we were talking about last week, as Sammy said, we were talking about exploring ourselves through characters or through art, through creativity. And we chatted about going into a character and how that helps us with our craft and with accepting humanity and exploring different parts of humanity. But what happens now that we've gone into the psyche of, let's say, of a character, or a different psyche of someone else we're empathizing with or exploring? What then? So what happens then when we lose ourselves in that person and forget where the boundaries stand between ourselves and this new character or person that we are exploring. And that takes us into ponderings for the day. Embodying creativity when life imitates art. And now we've delved into a character. So I'm going to keep this within the framework of acting. We've delved into a character, and that has exposed to us the things that we perhaps have resisted in going to places with the character. Like, let's say the character is very selfish or very dark. We have resisted going there. Now, what happens once we go there, once we embrace that side? Then is there ever a blurred line between coming back to self? And I feel like, Sami, you've experienced this very acutely because of your experience in the industry, and also because of the nature of the roles that you've played in musical theatre, which requires of you to be going back night after night to places, to the same repetitive emotions that we need to delve into with a character. So you kind of drop the mask of a character when you reclaim yourself at the end of a performance or at the end of the night. And so you mentioned to me once that that Velma kind of embodied characteristics, if I have it correctly, that you knew you wanted to be better at in your own life. Is that true?
Well, so the way I've understood it, come to understand it, is just I think in recent years, having really worked with shadow stuff, and then being able to look at all the ways in which Velma had characteristics. I had characteristics that Velma had that I'd never fully explored. And you know what comes? I think it's on a deeper level. I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but I think I was never born into a political family or a very activist kind of family. No one went to. My sister went to varsity, but she went overseas. So no one went to Wits. No one is exploring sort of like the socio-economic, political stuff. No one is really exploring feminism. It was almost like I was living in some sort of a beautiful bubble, but a bubble nonetheless. And I think these roles that have come to me, like I said to last week, was basically like whatever role has come to me has been as a result of my consciousness, so that I can go through the role and then meet that role at whatever level I'm at, and then take from that role and employ that back into my life. And so the system has gone up and up and up. And for me, I realized why Velma was such a huge turning point for me was that all through my life, I've been taught to be a good girl who behaves. People won't like you if you don't, if you challenge, if you stand up. If you're a pretty young thing, you get a perception that you are not brainy, or that you don't feel deeply, or that you're shallow. And so I was kind of like, without realizing that, all these earlier roles that I played that were very sort of like shallow because of the female experience of those roles, were kind of like the leading ingenue roles are generally kind of shallow parts. It's either Snow White, the princess, the perfectly pure as snow, or it is, do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like these very, very, very shallow experiences of the feminine. And even my first role was Joseph. I was just a dancing and adoring girl. The second was Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. We were all captured by these men and taken off. And it's lovely if you look at movie musicals, what a lovely, glorious thing it is. But when you think about it, these women were captured and taken off like they were just commodities, right? And then fell in love with their captor, almost like, so then from there it sort of went into Snow White, pure as the driven snow, and then went into Sandy, Greece, which was like, it was okay for Sandy to go into those other areas of that she ends up being, because she has been pushed to it by society. It wasn't her own choice, but she did it, but in a cool way. You know what I mean? So it's like all of these experiences led me to delving into more and more of myself. And like you, there would be moments when I felt so intensely angry as a woman towards men and not understanding like why people would think it's okay to hit on me. Why is it okay to do, to speak in a particular way to me? And it's only when I've sort of like experienced that within myself and my own power. So for instance, Morales was next, and that was a tough talking Puerto Rican, but I still had the young feisty, and it was still likable, a likable character. Again, be likable. And so then just delving into my career that way, then even Anita was like feisty, but she was still likable. But I didn't even have the full experience or understanding of the racial component within that. Like if I had to play that part now, I would bring something very different to it. Do you understand? Because she also had this whole other aspect of it where she turned, she was vulnerable. They were, the guys in West Side Story sort of almost want to rape her. There's this rape scene and she gets her own back. It's like turns it around in them. And I think artists of those cons is that we're always actually looking at the good, the true, and the beautiful. We want to see art that uplifts us. It either uplifts us so that we can see in another character something that says to us, if they can do it, I can do it. It's something inspirational in the art that makes you develop and grow yourself. And I think that's what you want to see. So the part of Chicago, as you know, like what we experience, is like these very strong women. None of them should be liked because they are portraying aspects of themselves that is extremely racy, sexual, predatory, manipulative, lying, murderesses, get away with anything, have this double agenda of all sorts of things going on. And yet the affirmation from the audience night after night is laughter, sheer applause, beautiful, bow down, bow down, bow down. Now, as I said, because I've been delving into shadow, I could see parts of myself that were the same as Velma. I integrated those parts. And because it was night after night, because it was on tour and not being able to separate, those particular characteristics came out in me. I used it as a armor, and I would defend and cling to my own story as much as I could. And it was only coming home that I realized, oh my, okay, that's cool. I'm glad I had that experience. Now go back to center.
Right.
So I hope I explained it. Yeah.
That's what happens on tour. Is it creates, and this is also really important to chat about for younger performers who have never toured, and that is where I've experienced the most likely places for a kind of a thing to happen where you, hi Melanie, where you like get kind of lost out of yourself, whether you get lost into the character you're playing, because that's a time of day when you feel in control in a way, and then you just don't step back out of that when you go home to the hotel, or whether you kind of get lost with the people around you. There's this very weird thing that happens. You kind of start losing yourself, and even me, Sami, I had a similar experience to you playing Roxy, because you're right. That's why I always say our journeys are so parallel, because I was also always cast in the ingenue roles and the ingenue roles and the ingenue roles, and then now Gabriella, and then went to Ariel, who was a bit more feisty, but still always acceptable feminine qualities. And playing Roxy was one of my biggest battles in this journey, and Sami knows this very well, was embracing the fact that Roxy was incredibly selfish and self-centered, but she was still liked, because I was taught that is not acceptable in a woman. And yes, I'm playing a character, and I knew that as an actress. I know I'm playing a character, but I couldn't accept that part of her until I finally did, after months of actually playing her. And then it became okay. Then it became blurry as to, I think this is where what I'm trying to get to. If Roxy can be selfish and liked, and Carmen can recreate selfishness, okay, then can't Carmen also be selfish and be liked? But
exactly.
But that's where one starts then behaving in ways that might be not completely within your character, as within Carmen's character, because you're on tour, you're receiving this amount of what do you call it? Like feedback, positive feedback from audiences for your character. You get onto the bus. Acknowledgement. You get onto the bus. You then do you kind of stay in that world and become more selfish in your life? Then I kind of feel like that's where the lines start getting blurred on tour. And that's the one thing. And I think it happens from my experience, because unless you're really grounded in yourself, which I have often. So let's talk about what grounded means. I think there's like two extremes to coping with tour. One is like becoming a hermit and staying within yourself. And that's what I tend to do. And the other one is going balls to the walls, like always out, whether it's partying or not partying, but always out with everybody and identifying with everybody and forming relationships with everybody, because there's a sense of security in that and a sense of like also, once again, positive feedback. And I certainly go to the other side. I go to the side where like the feeling is so exhausting of needing to ground myself every day because I feel out of body. I go into the character, come back into body, but then need to spend so much time recharging to not lose myself, because there's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of egos. And on top of that, you also have the ego of the character and then your own ego.
Yeah.
And when you're not home to deal with, when you're not home to almost have this rooted connection with family, friends, your own home, your own kind of the balance that I always talk about is important for performers, then it gets even harder to control that.
I agree. And I think, Cons, like you and I both have discussed this, because in the past, I've always been very withdrawn as well. So I'd do a performance and go straight home. And I would think that was recharging me in a way, but I was still exhausted the next day because I hadn't slept. But I kept thinking if I recharged myself physically, I would be emotionally fine and I'd feel strong again the next day. But I realized it's an emotional and a spiritual and a mental strain. So that's the one extreme. The other extreme is, like you say, complete partying and forgetting yourself. And I did that a mixture of both of Velma on this tour. So I completely engaged, but then I withdrew, but then never really had any exercises or formal senses of grounding myself. I thought I was, but I wasn't engaging in a routine that would recharge my spirit, that would recharge my emotional sense. Like you say, depending on what the character is, you are exploring every night particular emotions that are different from your own. And so there's this feeling of repressing your own emotions. And it's almost like you need some sort of routine to engage all of yourself again so that you don't feel drained. You think you're getting recharged by sleeping, but you're not.
So how, you see, I still feel confused by that. Like, how does one actually recharge? Because I have the same. I want to sleep. Then my entire life revolves around 8 shows a week and that character. Yeah. And I think that's cool. You know, that's our job. But I would get lost in, I'd go days without engaging in anything for me. And I'm talking about, I'd engage in Netflix and sleeping.
But then that's again like soothing and kind of running. So my feeling is this, like when you start getting into that feeling of depression, because it's essentially a depression of yourself, I think your natural vibration starts to lower. And so you can never recharge from that place. And there's only one or two things, a couple of things that can raise your vibration. One is to be deeply grateful and thankful. So you're actually going, thank you, I realize this. I'm thankful, or laughter, and then engage in something so that you're operating from a higher sense and then go into self. Because if you try and go into self from this lower place, you just feel depressed. If you try and access your self from a higher place, gratitude, go to your heart. Who am I in this? Thank you, God. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for what it's teaching me. But look how different I am. But thank you, grateful. Now just separate myself, be all of me, and enjoy everything that you're doing. So if you're going to watch Netflix, enjoy all of Netflix. Laugh loudly. Enjoy it. If you're going to write with all your passion.
So do it intentionally. Live intentionally.
Bring your full self to what you're doing. Because what we do is we tend to try and think, I've got this many minutes until I have to get on the bus. And so now what am I going to do? I have to do this and I have to do this, I have to do this. But you just feel rushed through it. You're not present in those moments.
Yes, that's exactly what happens. And it's like obsessive day after day of like an hour until this, and then an hour until beginners. And then,
and Shanti says something beautiful here because, you know, biggest empath of us all, possibly, let Shanti, big one. And let's not forget as empaths,
you're taking on
other insecurities. Oh, sorry, babe.
Yep, that's it. That is so true, Chantal, and that's it. That's why, if you are aware that you're an empath, I think empathy is once again a degree, but a lot of people are very highly attuned and very empathetic. Then you do take on everyone else's egos and insecurities and egos on bad things, but they're out of control things, and that's exhausting.
Yes, and all of us tend to be sensitive in this industry, but depending on what level of development you're at, what level of consciousness you're at, you will approach it in a different way. So you can either take on empathy as severe sensitivity from an ego place, or you can take it on from the wholeness of the empathetic being. So there's, again, you know,
it's all about balance.
With that.
Yeah.
And also understand, anyway, we'll get to these ideas and ways of actually understanding the other.
Right. Yeah. And that is, brings me to a great quote by Bob Dylan, because I went in search of whether I was the only one that felt this way. Before Sami and I actually started talking about this kind of stuff, I would always feel like I was the only one who felt kind of sometimes very suffocated and worried that I was doing something wrong, and why am I always tired and I'm not resting enough, and but being at the same time eternally grateful to be working, eternally grateful to be on amazing tours. So that's not what we're saying at all. We're just talking about the reality of day-to-day life, okay? Which you can romanticize as much as you want in your head, but when you're getting there and you've been in China for 3.5 months, I'm telling you now, there's certain things you need to learn to deal with. So Bob Dylan says, being on tour is like being in limbo. It's like going from nowhere to nowhere. And for some people, that's great, I think. And then for other people, it can be a sense of kind of limbo is not a good thing for them. And I know that, like, Bob Dylan was like, yes, I love limbo, and he would always go back on the road. And some people love being on the road. For me, it would vacillate between a state of anxiety and just because we love what we do. So we're always wanting to be the best. So that anxiety comes from fear, from not being good enough, and then from not doing what I need to do to recharge, to be good enough the next day, and then feeling myself going down and down and down and down and down, down the spiral. And then 5 months in China have gone past, and I'm come home and I'm so exhausted. Yeah, so that's just an interesting mask. And I put on a mask. We all put on masks at work. We're all professional. If we go to work, there's a certain way that we are in a workspace. Now, imagine never leaving that workspace for those people who aren't in the industry or who haven't toured. Now, imagine never leaving that mask behind ever, because you are with your colleagues on the bus, you're with your colleagues at the breakfast table, you're with your colleagues in the gym, you're with your colleagues in the pool. So do you then become the Carmen that you are on the couch at home with your family and friends, with your colleagues, or do you not? And if you don't, when do you become Carmen? Does that make sense? It's all these things that one needs to talk about and think about.
I think I think that you've taught me that as well. Like, I come in with my heart wide open and just expecting everyone to be.
I wish I was like that more.
No, I think the more I've become fully myself, the more I just think that people will accept me because I accept myself. And I realized that I need to still be that, but I shouldn't take people into my confidence as much, because people will meet you at their level of understanding as well.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I need to close off who I am, which means if I have fully accepted and integrated myself, just be that. You know, I don't need to say it and I don't need to show you. I can just be it.
Absolutely.
And be comfortable being that.
I think that's the where I certainly have found solace is at a stage in touring somewhere. I just decided if I'm perceived in a certain way, that's fine. That's just me being my authentic self, and that's all we can be. And we're playing characters on stage. That's enough. Like, we don't have to worry about what we have to be and represent when we're not on stage.
Yeah, I think the idea of masks is a tricky one, because you don't want to think that you're wearing a mask. But I think that the discernment of distance is better to think of. So the mask is protecting you from showing who you really are. Show who you really are, but have discernment with who has access to you and who doesn't.
Absolutely. Yes, that's it. Who do you let in, and who don't you let in? And I must say, Sammy taught me to be a little more open and a little bit more, a little bit less closed. A little more open and a little bit less closed with people. I always say I'm like a closed anemone. Like, I'm nice and I'm friendly like the way I am now, but I never let anyone very close to me. And then Sammy's like an open anemone, and she's like, no. So we kind of like balanced each other out, which was really good on tour. I mean, I learned a lot from you and from your way of being in the world and with people.
And me from you.
And Sammy always has a lot of friendships and really, really great relationships, because she just is who she is and lets people in. And I'm like a little bit more wary. I don't know, there's pros and cons.
Well, yes, you're much better at maintaining it. And I tend to like expect people to be at the same place every time I meet them. And if I go off on a tangent for 6 months and don't speak to them, I expect that they'll be right there when I come back. And I think that's also the sign of healthy relationships. But things need maintenance still too. You can't just be so self-absorbed. But Coms, did you have an exploration exercise or not?
So I wanted to ask you about, I do have an exploration exercise, but it's more of a strategy. So today it's going to be less journaling, and like maybe Jess, if you're watching, or anyone else who likes to journal with us, this is the second part of a 3-part kind of series about more industry-based chatting points. So like character, going into character, what that means on tour and all of that. So don't despair. We have a lot more journaling and self-exploration and stuff coming. But if you are watching and you're in the industry, I mean, I would just like to share some coping strategies for tour. So let's say coping strategies on tour. Okay. What has worked for me? So this is going to serve as our exploration exercise today. So I'm just going to pop up this visual, and you can just listen to what I have to say. And if you want to make notes about the strategies that I've really found work for me, then go ahead and do that. Because I'm telling you now, if you're young, you probably are going to go on tour. If you've been on many tours, you're probably going to go again. One never knows what life might hold, especially now in this weird time. So I remember I went on tour. Before tour, I would make sure that I would feel really balanced. I'd make sure that I was looking after myself, I was eating well, and that you get a good kind of sense of balance between family and friends. So see the people that are really important to you, and find a place in yourself where you feel balanced. So that means you've had enough exposure to people who bring out the best in you, who make you feel accepted for who you are. That's the most important one. Then I find it very soothing to take some kind of a vision board with me. I remember when I was at my most precarious, I had broken up with my ex-boyfriend, and I was about to embark on a massive tour of The Sound of Music. And what I then did was I made a vision board of things that made me me, that I resonated with, that was me. So I took photos of my family. I took moments from my past kind of life where I felt really secure in myself, photos of that, or little things that would represent that. I made sure to look around my house and kind of find something that was really me, Carmen, that really made me feel like, oh, this is, I have this in my home wherever I go, and I would take that on tour with me, whether that would be a collection of crystals, or whether that would be a photo frame with a photo, or a poster, or just something that really reminded me of home and who I am at home and who I am at my best. And I find it really, really important to take journaling equipment, or somewhere which you can write, and something that's going to bring you back to core every night, whether you're a Christian, whether you're spiritual and you like to read kind of books that are going to get you back to self, whether it's a book you've read a million times as a child, or just a way to balance you and kind of pop you out of the bubble of complete identification with tour and ego and everyone else involved in that situation. So it's just a gentle way to balance it out, because when you do that, then you, like Sammy said, you recharge yourself again, and then you're able to go back to work the next day and feel recharged. Also, make sure that you spend time with yourself, doing things that you do at home that bring you joy by yourself. And if that is cooking, then go and cook, buy a pot and make something. Or if that is walking, go for a walk, maintain your exercise structures, maintain your routines, get into a good routine and maintain it. My routine involved not ever going out really, but that was me. And then maintain a sense of always remembering that you are a professional in a professional environment. And this is where it can get a little bit lonely, but be wise with who you make friends with. Choose your friends wisely, and then confide in those people on tour. And don't have everyone else involved with everything, and don't wear your heart on your sleeve. People mean well, but we all, as Sammy said, resonate on different levels. So that's kind of what I would advise. Have you got anything you want to add to that, Sammy, in terms of just strategy?
No. I think those are very practical, beautiful practical ways as well. For sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's it. That's our exploration exercise.
Beautiful. Let's move on to heart space. Thank you. So ordinarily here we look at cues, and there weren't any this week, and I'm not surprised because it's been chaos in the world in the last week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, but it's been bubbling under for a lot longer. But this weekend and the last week has been particularly difficult, and I don't know if you felt it. Obviously you would feel it, but you can see it everywhere, on Facebook, on the news. It's just, we're bombarded at the moment with issues around the world that sort of just have made me realize how divided we are and how very differently we're thinking as a consciousness on this planet. And I think that we know that we're going through this time of epic transformation. And obviously there's so much that needs to be transformed, and nothing's going to happen overnight. I mean, it's overdue, long overdue. But I think the only way that we can truly get to how we can actually get through it is to understand how much is at stake and how much needs to be healed. And what you've seen on Facebook is just what I'm aware of, is just this intense rage, you know, and it's something to like identify with as well in some way, because as a human being, that's part of our elemental nature. Is fire is one of the elements. And I think rage has been absolutely ignited. If you're either for George Floyd and against the police, or if you're right wing and you're against everyone saying all lives, or Black Lives Matter, and you're saying all lives matter, whatever your stance is, it feels like everyone is carrying rage at some point. And I realized what was at the very base of this. And it's almost like it's built into the very core of our brain is the sense or the need for power. A human being still having power over something less powerful than ourselves. If you think about it, it's part of our survival, that fight or flight thing. In the beginning, it was like man needing to control his environment so that he could eat. And then it extends to the survival of the fittest, so power of one human being over another. So in other words, I kill you or you kill me. And then seeing as millennia have passed and we think that we're living in a civilized society where law and governance has been established and there are specific codes of conduct that you need to think, you think that this is sort of eradicated, but it doesn't. It just, this need for power just establishes itself higher and higher up this hierarchical chain.
The hierarchy of needs.
So we're settling into feeling safer by being embraced by a family or a group or a society or a country, or there are different levels of power. You just see it from a different place. And those that have it and those that are controlled by it. And amazing. I mean, if you think that if people in power had the wisdom to lead beautifully, I mean, that's utopia. And if all the people who are followers and of the system had a level of conscious thought that they could make, use their free will for good and think consciously and make choices and behaviors that were conscious. But we are all obsessed with having power over something weaker than ourselves, just to make ourselves feel less inadequate or less ordinary. And I was thinking as well, there is this archetype within a human being, which is the power struggle. And you can see it reflected in society. And the archetype is that of master and slave, of colonizer and the indigenous person, the male and the female, the adult and the child, the religious leader and his congregations or cults, the government and their people, a kingdom and its subject. And there's always somebody in charge, having the power and someone feeling powerless. And so for me, it's almost like this constant internal fight for power and the opposing fight of freedom and dignity. And I think as we we've gone into this whole experimental thing of like cognizant behavioral therapy and all that kind of stuff, but you almost have to, I think the only way to actually get to the point of understanding and eradicating this pain is bearing witness to someone else's pain. Absolutely bear witness to it and look them in the eye and not dismiss it and kind of say, I see you. Because immediately that opens up that compassion. I see you, I hear you. And by saying that I see your pain, it doesn't eradicate my pain. My pain is no less than yours. Yours is no less than mine. And by saying, yes, I see you, it just opens the door. And if you can't do that, there's serious work to be done in yourself. And the reason I wanted to post this was just because Chantal has posted the most beautiful link on Facebook. And if you can read it as well, and it's coming from a beautifully spiritual way of looking at things as well. But obviously we can't always look at things from a spiritual place because we're operating from different levels. And so I thought I would bring something to Moments of Mindfulness, which I'll do just now. But that's just my take on what's happening in the world at the moment. There's just this need for power and everyone has it. Yeah.
And I think that is so powerful to say that we should stop running away and acknowledge, because that is so hard to do because you're opening yourself up, but it is the one thing that needs to be done. Yeah. And we need to stop being defensive as white people and start being willing to go, yes, I see you, I hear you. You are allowed to be in pain. I'm sorry. I think that's really important. So let's go into quote of the day. So just very quickly, here it is. And this is really beautiful. Which really ties in beautifully with what Tommy said now. But before you judge me, deal with what I've dealt with, feel what I have felt, and try to survive what I've survived. And that is a quote from the character, the Joker. But Samantha actually sent me a bunch of quotes at the beginning of the show. And then she said, choose one. How funny. So, I mean, that's kind of synchronicity. And I think that's really beautiful. And that's so important to remember at this time. Thank you, Sami, for saying that.
Thank you for choosing it.
And on that note,
here we go, a moment of mindfulness. And so we're going to go into this very briefly. It's a topic that needs to be really fully explored, but it is something that maybe you can look into and then we can discuss it at a later stage. But if you're wondering why humans have so much conflict with another and how two intelligent people are just unable to see things from the same perspective because you're thinking that you're talking on the same level, the root of so much internal conflict and frequent inflexibility to adapt to and seeing different perspectives is so beautifully described in this model. And it's taken from spiral dynamics, and Dr. Claire Graves was the first one who created the psychological model. And it basically highlights the stages of development, so psychological development, and it's all around values. The hierarchy of value structures consists of 8 levels that individuals express at their in their psychological life. And it's basically developmental. So, like as a baby, what, it leads to particular points in your life, time-wise, but also psychologically, what happens with that. So I'll just show you the model. There are 8 levels, but in this model, there are less. And the reason being is that in this model, they haven't even taken into account the very, very first one. And that is actually, before all of this, is beige. Beige is just basically like the desire, it's like a cell. So like basically a basic sense of survival, just this instinctive self. It's archaic, it's basic, automatic, instinctive. There's no real thoughts, needs, whatever. It's just surviving. Okay. And then in the very next phase that you adopt is this purple stage. And it's called the magical stage. And basically what that is like exactly what we spoke about, needing group. It's a tribalistic kind of sense. It's fitting into a group. It's very magical thinking, maybe mystical, sort of tribes in the Amazon. If you think of that, there's a beautiful mystical nature to it, but it's very archaic. It's kind of very tribalistic. They look to gods and higher powers with rituals for protection. And the underlying theme of the magical self is to keep the spirits happy and the tribe's nest warm and safe. And then there is the next self. Oh my God. And you can recognize this in a leader in our country, in all countries. In fact, the main one at this point is the next stage of red, which is the impulsive self. And it's red, and it is highly driven by ego for power, glory, rage, revenge. It's egocentric, it's exploitive, it's impulsive, rebellious. It's an impulsive self. It believes it can take what it wants by aligning with power. And the basic theme is be what you are and do what you want regardless. And then after the stage, there's amazing awakening that happens here. And that suddenly goes to blue. And blue is the role or the rule. And you'll recognize this too. And this for me is like the main part of humanity at the moment, is possibly the rule self. It seeks ultimate peace, locked in the battle of good and evil. It's absolutist, obedient, purposeful, authoritarian. By following rules and exceeding its given roles, it knows its fundamental truth, and most religions and religious values are rooted in this stage. And the theme of this is life has meaning, direction, and purpose with predetermined outcomes. And then at each stage after this, there's amazing awakenings. The next is orange, and that leads to sort of like this very individualist sense. I'm an individual. Don't judge me by, I'm exceeding this level. And then from there, it goes to the heart, the green, like what you spoke about last time. The green is almost like this beautiful sense of like the sensitive self and wanting connection and community and sense of equalness for everyone. And it's almost like where the hippie revolution came from. And that's all about peace within the inner self. But then what happens is everyone's just one and everyone's just wafting around. So then after this, there's another huge sense of awakening. And that goes to the integral self. And it's almost like lifting now into a whole other tier of awakening, which is yellow. And that looks to like be a completely cohesive sense. It's so much more than world-centric. It's living life fully and responsibly, in awakening in accordance with who you are and what you're learning to become. And then finally, the last stage is the holistic self, which is teal. And this is what we all hope to be when we're gurus. And just at the point when we're leaving the planet, what we hope to achieve is compassion and harmony from a really one space of union. And that is to experience the wholeness of existence through mind and spirit. And so that's just very basic. Obviously, it's so complicated. But if you want to look at it, please do. Here is a banner for you to look at. You can go to my, here it is. It's basically Spiral Dynamics, created by Dr. Claire Graves. And there it is.
Amazing. Cool. That is so interesting.
Thanks.
That is such a great way to look. Is it, so it's like spiritual development. Is that right?
It's actually not. It actually starts off on psychological. It's a psychological level of development. And basically, once you've reached the yellow and once you've reached the teal, you're going on a completely spiritual path. But the first parts are really psychological.
So it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just on steroids, and a lot more.
And looking at values and psychological rather than just a need, just an instinct.
Yes. Amazing. Let's quickly do takeaway, and then we'll power on. Takeaway for the day. So we're quickly going to do our affirmation. We're running a bit over time. Here it is. I am perfectly capable of remaining rooted in my truth, no matter what the circumstances. Whether you're on Twitter, whether you're feeling pulled out of what is right by this crazy time where we are, just go back to source, go back to truth, go back to higher you and operate from there. And that's really it. Journaling, 5 things you are grateful for in the morning. 5 things you're really proud of yourself for doing in the evening. Sami?
That's it, my love. Go into Spiral Dynamics and then we'll chat again.
Have a good week.
Thanks, Combs. Bye. Mwah.
You cut me loose and set me free. You cut me loose. You make me win.